yeah, you bet I am.
Oh, yeah, you bet I am.
Welcome to Cerebellum Studios. Follow me.
Now it's time to start the show. The mics are on, the lights are low. We know all the pronunciation. It's a learning celebration. Senoritas and senores, clap your hands and join the chorus. Lots of wit and lots of humor. Franco's dead, it's not a rumor.
There's some wackos working here.
Oh, come on!
Spain is filled with clergymen. Here is David Sternavant.
Hello. You bet I am, because I am.
Mexico has enchiladas. Just be sure don't drink the water. Learn or you'll be speaking Spanglish. Then your grave will cause you anguish. So get comfy, grab a sandwich. It's the salsa-rific world of Spanish. Parte dos.
Arriba!
Hi, I'm Chaz Maston, and welcome to the salsa-rific world of Spanish, Part 2. Grab a cup of Colombian coffee, stick a burrito in the microwave, and prepare to sail to Gibraltar. You're about to enter the Spanish zone. Over the next couple of hours, you'll learn how to count all the way to 1,000,000 in Spanish. That'll come in handy once you're rich and you move to Puerto Vallarta. You'll learn how to tell time in Spanish, how to ask and say the date, how to talk about the weather, and how to use adjectives properly. You'll master the 3 types of Spanish verbs, and you'll know the names of the seasons, the months, the days of the week, and mucho more.
Remember that we're on videotape. You can fast forward the tape through sections you already know, pause the tape if you need to take notes, and rewind the tape if you need to see something again.
I'm talking to you from the salsa-rific world of Spanish, Part 2. Make sure you understand the vocabulary and concepts we presented in the salsa-rific world of Spanish, Part 1, before you dive into Part 2. If you don't, you'll be confundido.
What?
Confundido. It means confused.
I'm a woman, so I'd be confundida.
I'm confused.
Here's a quick rundown of what you need to know from the salsa-rific world of Spanish, Part 1.
In Part 1, we learned about the Spanish alphabet and how to pronounce Spanish letters and letter combinations. We also went over the rules of using accents in Spanish and the difference between the Spanish and English rules of capitalization.
We also learned to count from 0 to 99.
Learning how to greet people is an important skill in any language. In Part 1, you learned how to say such polite pleasantries as, hello, how are you? I'm fine, thank you. Now, when I tour about Spanish-speaking countries, I no longer have to look like the undereducated slob that I actually am.
We learned about articles, pronouns, and nouns. All these Spanish words have gender. They're supposedly all either masculine or feminine.
There are 2 verbs that mean to be in Spanish. One is the verb ser, and the other is the verb estar. In Part 1, we learned how and when to use each of these verbs.
In addition to all that stuff, there was a lot of vocabulary in Part 1 that we're going to assume that you know in Part 2. If you aren't too sure about any of this stuff, go back and watch Part 1. Otherwise...
Part 1, really basic stuff. Section A, learn to count.
At the beginning of each section, we'll give you some of the vocabulary we're going to use in that section. This is the vocabulary that is not the main topic of the section, it's the additional words we use in examples. Don't hesitate to rewind and go over the words again. The vocabulary sections are easy to spot as you rewind. When you see this V graphic, you'll know what's coming up.
When you see the V, get ready for vocabulary. And when you want to rewind and review, you can easily find the vocabulary sections by looking for the V.
In Spanish, a zoo is called a zoológico. Monkeys are called monos, and snakes are called culebras. Plátanos is the Spanish word for bananas.
Plátanos!
Por favor means please.
Another word we'll use in this section is the verb I. I means there is or there are. Don't worry about conjugations or details associated with this verb right now. You'll learn all that in more advanced Spanish classes. We're telling you about it now, though, because even introductory Spanish classes use the verb I, so you should be familiar with it. Just remember, when you see I, translate it as there is or there are.
If you watched the Salsarific World of Spanish Part 1, you learned how to count from 0 to 99. Now, we'll teach you 100 to 1 million.
Remember, if you already know how to count, then learning the numbers in Spanish is just like learning vocabulary, man.
When you learned the numbers 1 through 99, you first learned to count from 1 to 29. Then you memorized the multiples of 10 and tacked on the appropriate single-digit number.
For example, to say 76 in Spanish, you say 76. 70 is 70, the multiple of 10, and 6 is 6. Remember, you have to use y, which means and, between multiples of 10 and single digits.
For the numbers between 100 and 1000, you just have to memorize the multiples of 100, then tack on the appropriate multiple of 10 and single-digit number. Here, we'll show you. Let's start with 100 through 119.
100, 101, 102.
Whoa, break for a second. There are a couple of things to look at here. First, you don't put the E after the multiples of 100. E only goes between the multiples of 10 and the single-digit numbers. We'll point that out again later. Second, did you notice that 100 is cien, but 101 is 101, and 102 is 102? That's no mistake, folks. That's how it works in Spanish. We'll explain.
When you want to say 100, just 100, the word is cien. For instance, to count from 98 to 100, you'd say 98, 99, 100. You also use cien before a noun when you want to talk about 100 of something. For instance, to say 100 bananas, you'd say 100 plátanos.
You don't have to worry about gender with cien. You can use cien with both masculine and feminine nouns. You also don't have to change the form to make it plural. Cien is obviously always plural since it means 100.
But when you're counting numbers between 101 and 199, use ciento.
Ciento.
With an O on the end.
If you and your friend go cow tipping and you want to tell your friend how many cows there are in the pasture for your tipping pleasure, you can say, hay 100 vacas, which means there are 100 cows. If you just want to say there are 100, say, hay 100. If there are 101 cows, say, hay 101 vacas. Or you can say, hay 101.
The standard deviants don't endorse cow tipping. It's messy, dangerous, and not very nice.
Now let's run through numbers between 101 and 119. Between 101 and 109, use ciento with the single-digit number you need, like this.
101, 102, 103, 104, and so on up to 109. It's real easy.
Notice we didn't use y between ciento and the single-digit number. You don't need it there like you do when you tack a single-digit number onto a multiple of 10, like 52, which means 52. Now we'll show you the numbers 110 to 119.
110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116, 117, 118, 119, 120.
Just tack ciento onto the numbers 1 through 99, which you've already learned, right?
Now we'll show you the multiples of 100. Then we'll practice writing some numbers with the multiples of 100.
As we go over them, notice that all the multiples of 100, starting with 200, end in S. That's because when you do a literal translation of the Spanish numbers in the hundreds, you start with 100, then 200s, 300s, 400s. When there's more than 100, you say hundreds in its plural form.
200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900.
There's a gender issue with the numbers between 200 and 900. When you use these numbers before a noun, the hundreds place number has to agree in gender with the noun. Only the hundreds place number has to agree in gender. Here's an example.
Hay 216 monos y 642 culebras en el zoológico.
Let's look closely at how the number 216 works with the noun monos.
How do we do that? We do it by ending the word with os. The S is always there since we're talking about 200s, and the O makes it masculine. Notice it's only the multiple of 100 that has to match in gender with a noun. None of the other components of the number change to match gender. Now we'll look at the number 642 as it's used with the noun culebras.
Culebras, which means snakes, is feminine, so we end 600 or 600 with AS. The A makes it feminine to match culebras, and the S makes it plural. Only 600 has to match in gender with culebras. 42 does not.
We'll say it one more time. The hundreds places between 200 and 900 will always be plural, so they will always end in S. Just make the ending AS to go with a feminine noun,
or OS to go with a masculine noun.
Hey, now you can count to 900 with style and grace. Here comes 1,000. Now, the word for thousand in Spanish is mil. Now, don't confuse this with the English word million. In Spanish, you count the thousands just like you do in English. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and so on, like this.
1000, 2000, 3000.
There are two things to notice here. First, when you're talking about more than 1,000, mil doesn't become plural like the hundreds place number does. The thousands place numbers translate like they do in English: 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, and so on.
The second thing to notice is that when we wrote numbers in the thousands, we used a period instead of a comma after the thousands place. That's the way Spanish speakers generally write the numbers, with periods instead of commas.
It's just another one of those conventions you have to get used to. Here's what 100,000 looks like.
100,000.
100,000 uses cien, which means 100, before mil, which means 1,000. Use the form cien rather than ciento because you're talking about a single hundred.
The number 102,000 would be 102,000. In this case, you use the form ciento for 100. It's just as if you're counting between 101 and 199. Anything over 100 is ciento. With numbers in the thousands, you're just tacking the mil on the end to indicate a number in the thousands.
For the numbers 200,000 and above, use the appropriate multiple of 100 before mil.
200,000, 300,000, 400,000.
400,932. We pitched you a curve with that last number. Remember, you're counting just like we do in English. Just learn the vocabulary. That last number breaks down like this:
400,932.
The Spanish word for million is millón. When you get into millions, you have to make millón plural, since you're talking about more than 1 million, like you did with hundreds. The plural of millón is millones. Notice the singular form of the word has an accent, and the plural form does not.
So that's really all you need to know about millions. It's easy, man, right? All you need to do is tack on the number of millions to the word millón or millones. That's it. It's simple. Check it out, man.
1,000,000, 2,000,000, 16 millones, 492 millones, 300,945.
Just think about how you put numbers together in English, and keep in mind these simple rules.
When you want to say 100, just 100, the word is cien. When you're talking about more than 100 starting with 101, use the word ciento. Starting with 200, the hundreds places get an S on the end like 200, 300, and so forth. One more thing about the hundreds place numbers is that if they are paired with a noun, they have to match in gender with the noun they modify.
For the thousands place numbers, use the word mil to indicate thousands, whether you have one or more thousands. The thousands place number does not become plural when you have more than 1,000, nor do you have to consider gender with the thousands place numbers.
Millions are also very easy. A single million is millón with an accent, and for more than 1 million, use the word millones.
Section B, time dripping.
Keep in mind that you're not learning some intergalactic moon man language here. Things like counting, telling time, and talking about the weather work more or less the same way in Spanish as they do in English. It's really just the vocabulary and a few details that differ.
There are only 3 vocabulary words in this section in addition to the stuff we'll teach you about telling time.
Camarero means waiter. A waitress is called a camarera. Just add an A on the end.
Marzo is the word for the month of March, and septiembre is the word for September.
Now let's tell time.
To ask the time, say, ¿Qué hora es?
Camarero, por favor. ¿Qué hora es?
Es la una.
Gracias.
Here's how to say the time in Spanish. Use the correct form of the verb ser and then say the hour. Es la una, which means it's 1 o'clock.
Una, which means one, is singular, obviously. So we use the third-person singular form of the verb ser, which is es, and we use the singular article la. The hours of the day are considered feminine, so we use the feminine article la and the feminine form of one, which is una.
You'll remember from the salsarific world of Spanish, Part 1, that verbs ser and estar both mean to be.
Ser is usually used when you talk about permanent situations or characteristics, and estar is usually used to express locations as well as situations or characteristics that are likely to change.
So you may wonder why we use the verb ser to express time. It seems to make sense to use estar, since estar is usually used for situations that are not permanent, and time changes every second. Cast away logic, follow the convention, and use ser. That's just the way it's done.
Usually, when you're telling time, you'll use son las to express the time. The only time you'll use the singular forms es and la is when you're talking about a time between 1 o'clock and 1:30. Why? Because all the other numbers besides 1 are plural, and son is the third-person plural form of ser. Las is the feminine plural article that you need to match the plural number and plural verb.
¿Qué hora es?
Son las 4. Son las 11. Son las 6. ¡Ay!
We're running into another one of those situations where the literal translation from Spanish to English sounds kind of funny. Son las 6 translates roughly to it's the 6. That sounds odd to English speakers, but hey, what's up with the o'clock business that we use? It's all what you get used to.
Let's take a few moments to learn the origin of the phrase o'clock. When clocks were first becoming popular in English-speaking countries, not everyone remembered to use them. So often a person would say to another, "What is the hour?" And the other would reply, "The hour is late." Upon receiving an annoyed look from the questioner, the person answering would often realize, "Oh, clock."
Hey, when you want to talk about a fraction of an hour, there are a couple of ways to do it.
To say it's a quarter after 11, say, son las 11:15.
Which means it's 11 and a quarter. You know, like 11 and a quarter of an hour. Cuarto means quarter. Don't confuse it with cuatro, which looks and sounds similar but means 4. Here's another way you can say it's a quarter after 11.
Son las 11:15, which means it's 11:15.
On the half hour, you say,
Son las 11:30.
Which means it's 11 and a half. Media means half. It's kind of like when we say it's 11:30. Or you can say
Son las 11:30, which means it's 11:30.
So what if it's exactly 22 minutes after 6?
You'd say son las 6:22. To express the time between the top of the hour and half past the hour, just say the hour and add on the appropriate number of minutes after the hour.
If you want to say a time that's after the half hour, you say the upcoming hour and use the word menos, which means minus, to show how many minutes it is before the upcoming hour. It sounds confusing when I just sit here and talk about it, but it's very easy. Here's what I mean.
To say it's 7:50 in Spanish, say son las 8 menos 10. That means it's 8 o'clock minus 10 minutes. It means the same thing as saying it's 10 minutes before 8 or 7:50.
Remember earlier when we said that you'd only use the singular esla when you're talking about a time between 1 o'clock and 1:30?
That's because when you express a time between 1:30 and 2 o'clock, say 1:45 for example, you'd say son las 2 menos cuarto. That roughly means it's 2 minus a quarter. 2 is plural, so you have to say son las instead of es la. Remember, you can only use the singular forms es la when you express a time between 1 o'clock and 1:30.
Now do you understand?
Can we have another example?
No.
Oh, come on!
All right, fine.
Es la 1:25.
That means it's 1:25.
Son las 2 menos 25.
That means it's 1:35.
Oh, he can be taught.
Now let's learn how to ask the date.
Today is May 6th, the day of your Spanish exam.
What day is today?
Here's how to ask what day's today in Spanish.
Dios mío, ¿qué fecha es hoy?
Hoy es 6 de marzo, el día de tu examen de español.
Let's examine these sentences closely. Que is the question word that means what. When you use que as a question word, you have to put an accent over the E. We'll talk more about the question words later. Fecha is a Spanish word for date. Es is the third person singular form of ser, one of the verbs that means to be. And hoy means today. ¿Qué fecha es hoy? Means what date is today.
Now let's go over the reply. Hoy es 6 de marzo. Hoy es means today is. We translate 6 to the 6th, but actually it literally translates to 6. In Spanish, the word sexto actually means 6th, but they don't use that word when they express the date. They just use the number itself. 6 or ocho or whatever.
After the number of the day, we use the preposition de to mean of before we name the month, marzo.
Spanish speakers are flexible people. Just like in English, there is more than one way to ask the date in Spanish. Here are a few more ways to ask what day it is. Some of the questions and replies don't translate exactly. We've given you translations that are close English equivalents.
¿A qué fecha estamos, Victoria?
Hoy es 15 de septiembre.
¿Qué día es hoy?
Hoy es 15 de septiembre.
¿Y cuánto estamos, Victoria?
Estamos a 15 de septiembre.
It's my birthday.
Let's review. To ask the time, say, ¿Qué hora es? To give the time, use the correct form of the verb ser, followed by the article la or las, followed by the hour. Most of the time, you'll use the plural verb and article son las to express the time. The only time you'll use the singular forms es la is when you're talking about a time between 1 o'clock and 1:30. This is because all the other numbers besides 1 are plural, so they take a plural verb and article.
When you express a time after half past the hour, say how many minutes it is before the next hour by using the word menos, which means minus. There are several ways to ask the date, including ¿Qué fecha es hoy? And ¿Qué día es hoy?
Section C, small talk or how to talk about the weather.
If you ever find yourself waiting in a doctor's office or an elevator with a Spanish speaker, you'll need to know how to talk about the weather. Why? Because all humans, regardless of language or place of origin, are genetically programmed to talk about the weather when they have nothing else in common to talk about. Okay, that's a lie. But it's useful to know how to talk about the weather anyway. First, here's some vocabulary.
Oh man, I feel a nor'easter coming on.
The Spanish word for weather is tiempo, and the word for climate is clima. You can tell that tiempo is a masculine word because it ends in O. Clima ends in A, so it's feminine, right? Wrong! Clima is an exception, a freak, a quasimodo of a word. Clima is masculine, even though it ends in A.
Clima is masculine, even though it ends in A. Memorize it. And while you're at it, here's the rest of the vocabulary for this section.
Tormenta means storm. Hielo means ice. Granizo is hail. Mucho means much or a lot.
And malo means bad.
Tú sabes, soy malo.